Hello, my name is Paula Perez, and I'm an environmental correspondent for Latina Republic, where we're dedicated to advancing thought leaders in Latin America and navigating environmental solutions. So today I'm happily joined by Mr. Josiah Kephart. Yes. Would you mind introducing yourself a little bit and what you do?
Sure. My name's Josiah Kephart. I'm an assistant professor at Drexel University in the School of Public Health. I study environmental health and how the environment contributes to health and health disparities, usually in cities in Latin America and the US.
Perfect. Thank you. So the first question that I have for you is, could you describe the most significant health impacts of indoor air pollution from cook stoves in Latin American households?
Yeah. So the amount of air pollution that individuals will breathe from their cook stove depends a lot on what fuel they're using. And there are three main groups of fuels. The first one is what we call biomass fuels, and that is things like wood, charcoal, and dung.
Oh,
The second group is gas fuels, your gas stove or your LPG stove. And then the third is electric. And so both biomass and gas fuels can create indoor air pollution, but the indoor air pollution from using biomass fuels is much worse. And usually homes that use biomass fuels tend to have lower financial resources. Whereas when you have higher financial resources, you move to gas and then perhaps eventually to electric. So breathing indoor air pollution, again, the amount of air pollution will vary a lot depending on what fuel type you're using. But both pollution from biomass and gas fuels can lead to respiratory disease, including asthma and COPD, or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, long-term lung disease. Breathing this indoor air pollution can also lead to cardiovascular disease or lung cancer, and can really contribute to premature death.
Right, unfortunately. Yeah, thank you. I know that you're involved in the SALURBAL project. How have your findings from that influenced policy changes or interventions in urban health across Latin America? And if you could also kind of explain what that project is for the people who don't know.
Sure. So just for your understanding, the SALURBAL project is sort of separate from the cook stove work that I've done.
Yes.
But I'm happy to talk about it because that's the main thing I do now.
Right.
So the SALURBAL project seeks to understand how the urban environment contributes to public health in Latin American cities, and understand how changes to the urban environment, policy changes within the urban environment may be able to improve health and reduce health disparities within the region. And so I think that there are a lot of different steps that need to happen for policy to occur, but one of the big problems that we see in Latin America is that there are huge global disparities in public health evidence. So most of the public health evidence we have on how the environment impacts health or how policies can be made to improve health come from high-income countries like the US or Europe, or some middle-income countries like China. But certain areas have most of the scientific evidence. In other areas, including Latin America, there's very little evidence. And this really limits policymakers' ability to create solutions that work in their city or in their communities, right? Because you're just trying to apply this evidence from a completely different part of the world to your region. It may or may not work well.
Yeah.
And so one of our main goals in the SALURBAL project is to generate this evidence that's specific to Latin American cities, as in the diverse set of populations and urban environments and city design and layout and all of that within Latin America, so that policymakers in Latin America can use that evidence from Latin American cities themselves in order to enact policies that improve public health.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that is actually very important because I was also reading another article that mentioned like the application of Eastern or like Western standards, like it really doesn't match to what like the diverse landscape is of Latin America. So that is definitely something to take into consideration.
Absolutely.
Yes. What challenges do you face in conducting research on environmental health in Latin America, and how do you overcome them?
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of challenges studying environmental health, and some of them are common everywhere, and some are kind of specific to Latin America. But
Right.
um, we have the public health data systems in Latin America vary by country, but in some countries, there are challenges in the quality of the health data, the reliability of the health data.
Right.
And so if those say death records, for example, there can be a lot of there can sometimes be challenges that we have to overcome in terms of the quality of that and
Mhm.
special attention that we have to give in order to kind of improve the quality of that data as much as possible.
Right.
There can also be a lot of challenges in accessing this data. So
Mm.
this is
Yeah.
true anywhere, is that the
Mhm.
government, every local or national government may have a different policy about their data privacy, about what data they want to share with public health researchers.
Mhm.
And so, um, our in the SALURBAL project, we are 11 different institutions from 9 different countries. And so our collaborators, our partners in each country are sort of responsible for getting access to data in their own country. And so that can be a challenge then to try to pull that all together to be able to make statements about the region in
Right.
general, because data is coming from a lot of different places.
Yeah, and I was gonna add on to that or ask like how exactly that like accessibility to data like is attained kind of.
Yeah, so some countries have made their data publicly available. Say
Mhm.
we're talking about anonymized death records, for example.
Right.
In other countries, we have to have a direct agreement with the Ministry of Health in order to get access to this data for a specific purpose.
Right.
And that can change over time too, where different administrations can come in and change the policies. There's even, there's one situation where there was one country, I don't want to say what country it was, but where the Ministry of Health declined to give us their health data. And so we wrote some papers with studying a lot of other countries. And then after that, they saw that and they said, oh, actually, we want to share our data too, because we don't want to be excluded from this research.
Right.
So that can be good. But I think another big problem is that most public health research money out there wants you to focus on improving health in US populations
Right.
or other high income countries. And
Mhm.
so governments from high income countries don't necessarily want to give us grant money as researchers to study health in other places.
Right.
And so money to do research in Latin America, public health research in Latin America can be much harder to find. So that's kind of a constant challenge. And we found that private foundations can
Mhm.
kind of fill that gap sometimes.
Okay.
But then you're just relying on the generosity of individual super wealthy people. It's not
Right.
necessarily the best like systemic way to improve science.
Yeah, makes sense. I actually didn't think about that, but that is a great point to make. Can you discuss the potential benefits of transitioning? This is kind of going back to the
Sure.
cookstove conversation.
Yeah.
The benefits of transitioning from traditional cook stoves to more sustainable energy sources in terms of public health. So you did discuss the respiratory concerns and like the cardiovascular issues. It is quite obvious like why it would be better to switch to sustainable, but if you could elaborate on that.
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of health equity issues when we think about exposure to air pollution from traditional cook stoves.
Mhm.
And as a generalization, broadly speaking, the people who breathe the air pollution from traditional coke stoves the most tend to be women and
Mhm.
tend to be very young children who are, you know, uh, being cared for by those women.
Mhm.
And um, so transitioning from traditional stoves to cleaner fuels is removes really one of the biggest environmental causes to disease, for these individuals.
Right.
So there's huge benefits to public health by reducing pollution exposure. And then there's also big benefits to the climate if we can, for everything that we do to get off of fossil fuels and onto more renewable sources of energy for our cooking.
Right. And personally, what do you like based off of your research and experience, what do you see as like the future of like sustainable development in Latin America, or like what do you observe so far? Because obviously we know that implementing sustainability is important and it's valuable. And as you just mentioned, it'll help reduce a lot of the disparities, but like where are we right now with that, you know?
Yeah. So in terms of cook stoves within Latin America, generally a much higher proportion of people in cities, in urban areas,
Yeah.
have access to cleaner fuels,
Okay.
whereas most of the people who are still using traditional cook stoves are in rural areas.
Right.
And this, of course, varies hugely by country and
Mhm.
kind of tends to be correlated with the country's, economic development, where
Right.
wealthier countries tend to use cleaner fuels and
Mhm.
um, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think in terms of traditional cook stoves within Latin America, there have been huge strides in urban areas, but now it's time for rural areas to kind of catch up. So we need to kind of expand access in rural areas to electricity and other cleaner sources of energy.
And do you think like for that to happen, like what exactly needs to happen? Like more like local, like government, national, like intervention, or like what exactly needs to take place?
Yeah, well, I think um, that's a tough,
Yeah.
a really tough question. I think it just needs a lot of money and a lot of infrastructure, right? And I think that there are a lot of quality of life improvements that we might expect to see if, say, a town gets electricity that didn't previously have it.
Mhm.
But I think what I want to emphasize is we would also see a lot of public health benefits from that. And so
Right.
we see that as a public health energy or public health intervention as
Yeah.
well.
Yes. And kind of transitioning into that, what role do you believe community education and awareness play in addressing the issues of indoor air pollution and energy efficiency? So, like on a
Yeah.
more community basis. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think, community education awareness plays a huge role. You can ask individuals to make changes, but individuals are often, individual household may or may not have the financial resources to get a new stove, for example. And so, most communities have multiple priorities that they're dealing with simultaneously,
Yeah.
and cooking fuel may or may not be considered a top priority.
Mhm.
And so, what we're hoping to do with our research is provide this strong evidence on the what, the where, and the who of these problems.
Right.
And then that evidence can be used by communities to empower communities to then take that to policymakers and demand the change that they want to see. Because it's policymakers are often, they want to see, well, what's the scale of the problem here? How serious is this really?
Right.
And they may or may not be very responsive to stories from the community. And
Yeah.
so I think there are a lot of things that need to come together, but we hope that we can contribute some solid scientific evidence that these
Mhm.
communities could then take with them to demand the policy change to improve the community's health.
Yes. Makes sense. I like that response.